Lord Zeus, grant that I punish this man who wronged me first, this godlike Paris. Bring him down low beneath my hand so that all people in the future shrink from harming a host who treated them with love and friendship.
With that, he aimed, then hurled his long, dark spear and struck the finely balanced shield of Paris. The sturdy weapon pierced the shining shield, went through the intricate breastplate, and then cut right through his tunic to his flank. But Paris escaped Black Death by leaning to the side. Then Menelaus, son of Atreus, drew out his silver-studded sword and raised it high, and then smashed it on the decoration of his opponent's helmet. But the blade shattered and broke in fragments, 3 or 4, and fell out of his hand, and Menelaus groaned and looked up towards the spreading sky and shouted,
"Father Zeus, no other god could be more cruel than you are. I thought that I would punish Paris for his crimes, but now my sword is broken in my hands. I threw my spear away from me in vain. I did not hit him."
Then he leapt on Paris and grabbed him by the shaggy horsehair helmet, twisted him round and started dragging him toward the well-armed Greeks. And Paris had a strap adorned with rivets that secured his helmet underneath his chin, which choked his delicate neck. Now Menelaus would have dragged him the whole way there and won the glory for all eternity, but Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, looked down with her keen gaze and broke his oxhide leather helmet strap. Then Menelaus, with a firm, sure grasp, pulled off the empty helmet, whirled it round, and tossed it out toward the well-armed Greeks, and his companions caught it. Menelaus dashed back again, pursuing Paris, longing to kill him with his spear of bronze, but then the goddess Aphrodite snatched up Paris with greatest ease, as gods can do, and hid him in a dense mist and set him down inside his fragrant, perfumed bedroom. Next, the goddess went off to summon Helen, whom she found upon the high wall with some Trojan women. She plucked at Helen's scented dress, disguised in look and voice as the old spinning woman who fashioned pretty woolen clothes for her in Sparta when she lived there, who had loved her. In this guise, heavenly Aphrodite said,
"Come here. Paris is calling you back home. He's inside the bedroom, on the knotted bed. His clothes are dazzling, so is his beauty. You would not think he just came back from fighting. He seems like someone ready to go dancing, or just stop dancing, sitting down to rest."
With these words, Aphrodite roused her feelings. She saw the goddess had a throat and neck of most extraordinary beauty, breasts to stir desire, and bright shining eyes. She was astonished, and she said, "You, goddess, why do you want to trick me in this way? Will you keep leading me to yet more cities in Phrygia or in fine Maeonia, if any other mortal takes your fancy? Now Menelaus has defeated Paris and wants to take me home with him again, although I am so hateful. Is that why you come to me now with these tricks of yours? Then go to him and sit beside him yourself. Give up the path of gods and let your feet never turn back again to Mount Olympus. Spend all your time on taking care of Paris, crying for him, until he makes you either his slave girl or his wife. But I will not ever go back. It would bring retribution, and I will never service that man's bed. All of the Trojan women in the future will blame me if I do, and in my heart I will endure more pain than I can measure."
Glorious Aphrodite, furious, said, "Stubborn girl, you must not make me angry, or in my rage I will abandon you and start to loathe you with as deep a passion as I have loved you as my friend till now. I shall devise a strategy to make you loathed and abhorred by both the Greeks and Trojans, and you shall die a dreadful death."
At this, Helen, the child of Zeus, was terrified. She wrapped her bright white cloak around herself and slipped away in silence, secretly, so that the Trojan women did not notice. The goddess led the way, and when they reached the marvelous house of Paris, slaves were quickly scurrying around to do their work. But Helen, the godlike woman, went up to the bedroom, and Aphrodite, who loves smiles, was there. She drew a chair for her and set it down across from Paris Alexander. Helen, the child of Zeus who bears the Aegis, sat there. Her eyes would not meet his. She spoke and scolded her husband. So you came back from the fighting. I wish that you had died out there, defeated by that strong man who used to be my husband. Before, you claimed you were superior to warlike Menelaus in your strength and hands and spear. So go on, challenge him. Call Menelaus back again to fight you. But no, I order you to stop. Do not make war and fight with ruddy Menelaus. It would be idiotic. You would soon lose and lie dead beneath that fighter's spear.
Then Paris answered, "Do not scold me, wife, with so much criticism of my courage. It is true, Menelaus beat me this time, thanks to Athena. Next time, I shall win. We also have some gods on our own side. But come now, let us go to bed and take pleasure in making love. I never felt desire like this enfolded all around me, not even when I first took you away by ship across the sea from lovely Sparta, and afterwards upon the Isle of Crenea. I shared a bed with you, and we made love. Not even then was I so seized by sweet desire for you." He led her to the bed. His wife came with him, and the two of them lay there together on the well-made bed. But meanwhile, Menelaus paced around all through the crowd like some wild animal, trying to catch a glimpse of godlike Paris. None of the Trojans or their noble allies could find where Paris was, though if they had, they would not have concealed him out of friendship. Indeed, the Trojans all detested Paris, as if he were Black Death. Then Agamemnon, the Lord of Men, said,
"Listen to me now, Trojans, Dardanians, and allied fighters. It must be obvious that Menelaus has won the duel. So you must return both Argive Helen and the treasure with her and pay a proper compensation too, so people in the future will remember."
The Greeks approved the words of Agamemnon.
Hi, how's everybody doing? You are allowed to yell even though it's a library, just so you know. So that's it? That you're just that good? All right. We'll work on it. My name's Aidan Flax-Clark. I'm the director of Live from NYPL. I'm thrilled to see all of you here, and also all of you who are watching online. We are here to talk about the incredible Iliad translation by the amazing Emily Wilson. So give it up. We are very lucky to present this at the closing of the library's 4th annual World Literature Festival. The festival, which takes place across the whole library system, shines a spotlight on books, writers, and artists from around the globe and reflects some of the many languages spoken in our city's diverse communities. Now, technically, no one speaks the language in the Iliad, but we'll let it slide. It's still world literature. And we feel this is a really wonderful way to cap it off. This event also highlights our long-running exhibition, Treasures, which I don't know if anyone in this room has been to. It's just upstairs. Great, yeah. If you haven't, it's up for, I think, 72 more years, so you have a little bit of time. Treasures is sort of a greatest hits of our special collections. It goes across 9 thematic sections to explore the millions and millions of incredible items that we hold in our research libraries, not just here, but at the Library for the Performing Arts and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. And one of those themes is the written word. And you know, you probably won't be surprised to hear that one of our greatest collecting strengths is the written word, ranging from cuneiform tablets to contemporary literature, representing hundreds of languages and formats, and many, many masterpieces of the Western literary canon. And arguably, nothing is more of a masterpiece in the Western literary canon than the Iliad. So if you haven't been to check that out, please do. It's free, it's upstairs, it's also online, so you have no excuse. The Iliad, if you haven't purchased your copy yet, is available for sale over here, and I very much encourage you to buy a copy. It is truly incredible. Emily will be signing afterwards over there. And if you can't purchase it, obviously everyone here has a library card. Surely no one would come here and not have a library card, right? So you can also, I don't know, I think there's a couple of you, but we'll find you. But you can get it with your library card, of course. Very quickly, I want to tell you about some other events we have coming up, and then we're going to bring up Emily Wilson. On Thursday, the great novelist Neil Mukherjee is going to be here to talk about his new novel, Choice, and he's going to be speaking with Hana Yanagihara. The week after that, Jamaica Kincaid and Kara Walker will be here speaking with Hilton Alls about their incredible new book called An Encyclopedia of Gardening for Colored Children. Colm Toybeen is going to be talking about his new novel, Long Island, which is a sequel to Brooklyn, with writer Keelan Hughes. And there's a lot more. It's all free, so you have no excuse not to come. nypl.org/live. Check it out. Sign up for our newsletter. That's how you hear about all of our events. You got note cards when you came in. Those are for asking questions. Please write down your questions. I have some colleagues who will be coming by to collect them from you. Emily would love to answer some of your questions at the end of this conversation. And if you're watching online, you can put them in the chat or email publicprograms@nypl.org. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isbahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos. Treasures programming is made possible by the estate of Helen Sisterson. And of course, all of this is not possible without all of you. So thank you very much for being here. And please join me in welcoming Emily Wilson. Hi.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And I forgot to say, let's give it up for Morgan Spector and Ben Shenkman, huh? They're pretty good at acting. Mm-hmm. And you'll be getting more of them later. And maybe I can ask you first, before we dive into the book, about that reading that they started with. We picked these readings together, you and I, which I had so much fun doing. And can you, this reading was one of your suggestions, and can you talk about why you suggested it and why you wanted to hear it tonight?
So I was thinking of readings that I haven't sort of done a million times already and been recorded doing, or other people haven't sort of done and been recorded doing. And I thought, if we're not going to have the very beginning of the poem, in a way that scene is the very beginning of the Trojan War story, done in this characteristically Iliadic, sideways way, where we don't actually start in a sort of blow-by-blow chronological way, but we get the abduction of Helen sort of done implicitly by this, it's as if it starts all over again with the Iliad. We've had in Book 2 the muster at Aulis, but done in this weird way with the catalogue of ships. And then in Book 3, we have, as it were, the first time that Paris and Helen have sex. And I think it's fascinating both because it's such an anticlimax. Right? I mean, it's actually not an exciting sex scene at all.
No.
And that's really important. I mean, I think the fact that sex is represented in this poem in this as both essential for the backstory of the war, and yet that's actually not what it's about at all. And also that Helen is such a fascinating character, and the ways that in this poem in which men, warriors, are constantly enslaving mortal women, this moment of, as it were, domination of a mortal woman who's being forced into bed with a man, the way we see that operating is through the goddess dominating the woman as opposed to the man dominating the woman. I think there were so many elements of that scene that are so fascinating in how the Iliad approaches its own subject.
Yeah, and so chillingly dominating.
She's so creepy, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, really creepy.
Very upsetting.
Yes.
And it has the sort of nice moment of impotent rage with Menelaus, which I feel like there's a lot of in this book. You know,
it's very funny as well, yes.
Yeah.
Which the Iliad, I think one may not think of it as very funny, but it is very funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a laugh riot, but you know.
It depends how you play it, right? It depends on the performances.
Yeah, that's fair.
That could be a challenge to you guys. Amp up the humor for the next one, please.
All right, yeah, make it funnier, okay?
Make it funny.
I think you just get a funny knob, but you just turn it up. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I love this translation.
Thank you.
I think I wrote to you in the fall when I first read it that I studied classics a little bit, I've read a lot of it, have always felt like the Iliad was an obligation and not a pleasure. I felt much differently after reading yours, so thank you.
Good.
And you talked in the intro about how you have a really long relationship with this poem, that you started reading it when you were maybe a teenager and, you know, since then have read it a million times and taught it, and that when you first read it, you liked the Odyssey, but that you loved the Iliad. So what was it? What got you when you first read it, when you were young?
I think when I first started reading little bits of Homer in Greek and sort of dipping into translations when I was a teenager, I was thrilled especially by the depiction of the gods in the Iliad. And the whole divine action is so much more complex in the Iliad than it is in the Odyssey. In the Odyssey, we have so much of Athena, and Athena's a fantastic character, but the infighting of the gods and the sense of humans are in this world that we can't possibly understand the plans of Zeus, and the chillingness of how does Aphrodite operate and how her chillingness and scariness is different from the scariness of Poseidon or the scariness of Hera, and yet they're all so scary. I love that. I mean, I think also, being a gloomy, gothy adolescent, I like the way the Iliad is all about death, and you don't have to be a gloomy, gothy adolescent to think there's something profound about the way the Iliad reckons with conflict in human societies, in divine societies, and power, but also in the fragility of the human body, which can be pierced by a weapon at any point, at any moment, but also in any area. We can always, at any moment, die.
Right. Yeah, the visceral quality of that poem is sometimes very upsetting.
It's deeply upsetting, but in a way that feels truthful.
Yeah.
Despite the lack of anatomical realism, it has this metaphysical kind of realism.
So how now, whatever it is, 35 years or so later, is your relationship with the poem the same? Do you have these same feelings? How has it changed?
I think I think it's very common when you first start reading a very big book that you can't quite get your arms around it on the first or even the third reading. So I think, in my first few reads of the Iliad, even once I got to college, I think I was very much focused on the Achilles plot. And of course, the Achilles plot and the Hector plot are, those are the obvious things going on. But the whole wealth of quote unquote minor characters, all of whom are treated with so much empathy and understanding, I think I have a much greater appreciation for all the characters who are not Achilles or Hector, who are actually also very, very deeply realized and felt.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people get such deep backstories, I think, in this book.
Even if they only appear for 3 lines. Like in the catalogue of ships, Nereus, who comes with his pathetic contingent of ships, and he's the cutest guy who ever came to Troy, and he didn't have many ships, and he was soon dead. And yet he's so memorable.
Well, he was so cute.
He was so cute, so of course you remember, yes.
Well, maybe I can ask you to give us a taste of what this poem sounds like in the original. Would that be all right?
Yes.
Emily has agreed to read a little bit of this in the original Greek, so you're very lucky.
The mic was very high, which it suddenly is. These actors are very, very tall.
And is this the opening of the poem?
This is the opening. It will be if I can make this work. Mernin aidethea peleador ekeleos ulomenen he muria kaio isalge etheka. Polas difthimus psukasa idi proiapsin heroon autusta haloria chuke kunessin oio noistite passi dios tetele tabule exudeta prota diastetena risanta atredesta anaxandron kai dios Achilles. Gets clapped. Should I do the English too, or should we just leave to mystery what that means?
What do you think? Should we hear the English? I think they don't want it.
Okay, right. So as you can hear, the Greek has its own very distinctive sound, and of course English is a different language with a whole different set of syllables. I wanted in the translation to evoke the fact that it's metrical, musical, designed for oral performance, and that it has alliteration, but I can't use the same alliteration because the sounds of English are different. So I use iambic pentameter, and I try to work as much as I can with sound and voice and performability. Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus. which caused the Greeks immeasurable pain, and sent so many noble souls of heroes to Hades, and made men the spoils of dogs, a banquet for the birds. And so the plan of Zeus unfolded, starting with the conflict between great Agamemnon, lord of men, and glorious Achilles.
Well, that was a little better than when I read it in my second year Homer class. And I'm sure everyone knows that this is how the poem was performed, by rhapsodes reading or reciting from memory parts of the poem for people in I don't know, public squares or
civic and religious festivals. I mean, so much of what we think we know about how Homer was performed is based on, much later and cobbled together pieces of evidence. But yes, we know for sure that the primary way that people experienced Homer in antiquity was oral performance.
And you, am I right, I think you said in your intro, as you were working on your translation, you read your version out loud quite a bit while you were...
I did a lot of reading out loud, both of the original and of my drafts in progress. I mean, not hamming it up in that way, because, just doing it to my cat, she's not impressed with, the hamming it up. But as with any kind of writing, but I think especially poetry, you can't tell what's wrong with it until you start reading it out loud. And the ways that this is a poem which has multiple different voices, and the different characters need to sound like themselves, meaning not all the same as each other. The emotions of each speech need to be clear in the English as they are in the Greek. Those kinds of things, I felt I would often catch things that were wrong about my draft in progress by reading it out loud and sort of testing it on the ear.
And how is your cat on feedback?
They're hopeless. I mean, they just sit on the computer screen and they do nothing.
So they just thought it was great.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about the formation of the poem, because I find that sort of fascinating, how it went from, previous texts to the written version of the Iliad. What is the sort of journey of the poem from the beginning to the state that we know it in?
So that is a version of the capital H, capital Q Homeric question, on which a huge amount of ink has been spilt over the past, especially over the past 150 years or so. And
should we caveat it, like what we know as best as possible?
What we know as best as possible. I mean, there are multiple theories. What we know is that it's based on oral tradition. So for many centuries, before about the mid-8th century BCE, Greek speakers didn't have reading or writing. And we know that in the course of that period, there were oral poets who were composing poetic narratives about the Trojan War and the war in Thebes, and these characters like Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon, inventing story patterns and also inventing poetic tropes to go with the story patterns, such as many of the formulae that we find in Homer, the rosy-fingered dawn or the winged words. Those are traditional formulae. Those are not things that are invented by a single individual. They're developed over the course of many, many generations of oral storytelling tradition. The Iliad and the Odyssey were composed once the Greek-speaking world suddenly had writing again and suddenly adapted the Phoenician alphabet to be the Greek alphabet. And I would argue that it was with the help of writing that in some way or other that these monumental poems were composed. Because, of course, to do an oral performance that lasts for 25 hours or so, or however long the Iliad takes, and then to imagine you can just remember all that and then do the exact same thing the following night, I think without the new technology of writing, it's more or less impossible to see how that could work.
Right.
So using this new tech, either one amazing singer or pair of singers or whatever we think might have happened, maybe it was dictated, maybe there was a collaboration. At some point or other, there was this composition of these poems which draw on this long tradition, but do a really weird set of things with it. So it's not giving you the most obvious, you all know this story of the Trojan War and story of what was it like for those warriors to come back home. We know those were traditional stories, but the Iliad doesn't, I mean, as I was saying before about the Book 3 passage that you just heard, doesn't start at the beginning, doesn't end at the end, doesn't focus on Trojans versus Greeks, doesn't have the judgment of Paris, doesn't have the wooden horse, leaves out all the famous bits of the story, right? I mean, which is something you'd only do if you're a very sophisticated poet-storyteller composing for a very sophisticated audience who already knows the boring old ways that this story is usually told and is doing something both monumentally longer than a usual after-dinner or regular festival appearance telling of here's the wooden horse yet again, and you can do it in half an hour and it's fine. It's doing something monumentally bigger and yet also smaller, because the Iliad only the action takes only a month and a half, and it, as I said, leaves out most of the story.
Right. Why is there a guy named Homer on the cover of these books? Because, like, he didn't exist, right? Or probably didn't exist.
I mean, if there was a single person who composed these texts, then maybe he was called Homer, you know? I mean, Homer is an author function, right? Homer doesn't necessarily have to be a biographical single individual. Homer is the name for whoever, whatever composed the Iliad and the Odyssey.
All right. I always wondered
And,
about
you know, maybe he or they was a blind singer from Chios, as we're told by the hymn to Apollo, right? But that's also just, you know, it's much later ancient marketing for the Homeric teachers of Chios who wanted to say that was our homeboy. Yeah. And as in the famous 7 cities claimed Homer dead, through which the living poet begged his bread. So many Greek cities wanted to say Homer grew up here, you know, because once Homer had made it big, which was many centuries after the composition of these poems, of course everyone wants to say, we really have Homer.
So it's a marketing scheme.
It's a marketing scheme, yes. I mean, it's still a marketing scheme for Norton, right? They put the name Homer really big, because you know what that means.
Yeah, although you're pretty close in size, I think, on the cover. That's pretty great.
Getting bigger and bigger, yes.
Well, it ties into my theory that I was trying to sell you on earlier, which I'm not sure you were buying, that this is like the proto-Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know? Mm-hmm. That it's like there's a sort of core story and a bunch of characters and then a bunch of spin-offs. And now I find out also great marketing. It's like really the whole package.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there were so many sort of possible comparative points, but yeah, the idea of a whole mythical world of which there are many possible ways in and many tellings, that's the case for Marvel Odyssey, and it's also the case for the cluster of Trojan War stories and stories of the heroes, I mean, Jason and the Argonauts and the Thebans and the House of Laius. All of those cluster of stories appear in both narrative epic like the Homeric poems, but then also get redone in tragedy and get redone over and over by different poets and tragedians. Yeah,
right. Like all the great tragedians, they all have their spin-off stories, right? I mean, them have spin-offs from the Trojan War. I think my mic is cutting out a little bit. I apologize, everyone, if you can't hear me.
Yes. Yeah, Aeschylus is supposed to have said that all of his plays were slices from the great banquet of Homer. So, you know.
You can tell why he was a good writer. So we're gonna bring Morgan and Ben back up in a second, and I was wondering if you could help this next reading, which is from Book 14, and I think one of the reasons that we picked it was that it's a little unique in the context of the book, although maybe not as unique as I thought from what you were saying earlier, is that it's kind of funny, mm-hmm. and it has sex. You know, which, not that there's none of that, but compared to all the, you know, stabbing and screaming that happens in this book, there's much less of it. So what do we need to know about this scene before we hear from Morgan and Ben?
So I think it's interesting to compare and contrast this scene with the previous scene. You'll hear that there's a similar trope in how does Paris do his shut-up lines to Helen and how does Zeus do his shut-up lines to Hera. I'm not sure where we begin or end, but this is a scene from Book 14. Hera is, as is typical, wheeling and dealing against the master plan of her husband/brother Zeus. And she has a plan for how to intervene in the human battlefield, which she feels she can do only if she manages to distract him. So Zeus turns his eyes away from the battlefield, stops monitoring everything, and then she can get the battle started again and result in more slaughter of more Trojans, which is her ultimate goal, is to result in Trojan genocide as quickly as possible. Whereas Zeus's plan involves not that Troy won't be destroyed, but that it won't be destroyed quite yet. There's going to be a slight delay in the massacre because Zeus has yielded to the pleas of Achilles' mother Thetis to cause Trojan success while Achilles is sitting out of the battlefield. So Hera's scheme is paradoxical in a couple of ways, in that she's borrowing the skills of her god of strategy husband and being strategic, and she's also borrowing the skills of her fellow goddess and rival Aphrodite, using the tools of seduction. So she seduces her husband so that she'll be distracted and take a nice nap. She sort of over-determines it by also getting the god or allegorical representation of sleep to ensure that he really does take a totally conked-out ambient kind of nap, in order to ensure that Poseidon can stir up the troops and Hector will be wounded. So it's a scene which is, I think, very funny, as well as on the human level horrible, because this is going to result in pain and suffering for human beings. But it's also very funny to see how this supposedly smart god of strategy is hopeless, both at seeing through what his clever wife is doing and also hopeless at trying to do a chat-up line. He does this sort of ridiculous pile-on of the most useless possible chat-up line, which is, let me boast about how many women I've raped, and then let me boast about another one that I raped, and let me boast about another one that I raped, and then it goes on and on and on. So I think it's quite funny, and it has maybe comparable to the previous scene, this intertwining of divine and human action, as well as this intertwining of, is this funny, or is this chilling, or is it a bit of both?
All right, well, let's bring up Morgan Spector and Ben Shenkman for another reading.
Mm-hmm.
Hera quickly came up to the peak of Ida, Gargaron. And Zeus, who gathers clouds together, saw her, and at the sight of her, desire enfolded his cunning mind as when they first made love and went to bed together secretly so that the loving parents would not know. He stood in front of her and said to her, Hera, what do you want? Why have you come down from Olympus to this place? You brought no horses and no chariot to ride.
Deceitfully, the goddess Hera answered, Husband, I am about to go and visit the limits of the earth where food is grown, to see the origin of all the gods, Ocean and Mother Tethys. In their house, they cared for me and nurtured me, and now I plan to visit them and stop their quarrel. They have been holding back from one another, and for a long time, they have not made love. Anger has fallen on their hearts. My horses are standing at the foothills of Mount Ida, where many creeks and fountains flow. They will carry me over land and over water. But I have come out here from Mount Olympus because you would be angry with me later if I had failed to tell you I was going to visit Ocean, where the streams run deep.
Then Zeus, who gathers clouds together, answered, You can go later on that jury, Hera, but now let us enjoy some time in bed. Let us make love. Such strong desire has never suffused my senses or subdued my heart for any goddess or for any woman as I feel for you now. Not even when I lusted for the wife of Ixion and got her pregnant with Pirithous, a counselor as wise as any god. Not even when I wanted Danae, the daughter of Acrisius, a woman with pretty ankles, and I got her pregnant with Perseus, the best of warriors. Not even when I lusted for the famous Europa, child of Phoenix, and I fathered Minos on her, and godlike Rhadamanthus. Not even when I wanted Semele, or when in Thebes I lusted for Alcmene, who birthed heroic Heracles, my son, and Semele gave birth to Dionysus, the joy of mortals. And not even when I lusted for the goddess Queen Demeter, who has such beautiful, well-braided hair. Not even when I wanted famous Leto, not even when I wanted you yourself. I never wanted anyone before as much as I want you right now. Such sweet desire for you has taken hold of me.
Deceitfully, the goddess Hera answered, "Terrible, terrifying son of Cronus, what have you said? You want to make love now? Upon the peaks of Ida, in a place where everything is visible all around? But what if one of the immortal gods witnesses us up there in bed together and goes away and tells the other gods? I could not get up from the bed and go back to your house. It would be very shameful. But if this is really your heart's desire, you have a chamber which our dear son built. Hephaestus fixed strong doors onto the frame. Let us go lie down there if you are really so tempted by the thought of making love."
Then Zeus, the god who gathers clouds, replied, "Do not be frightened that some god or human might see us, Hera. I will wrap around us a golden cloud so we cannot be seen, even by Helios, the sun whose vision is sharpest and whose light sees everything." With this, the son of Cronos took his wife into his arms, and underneath them both the bright earth grew fresh grass and dewy clover and thick, soft hyacinth, which kept them up above the ground. On this plant bed they lay, surrounded by the lovely golden cloud, which sprinkled shining drops of dew upon them. Then Zeus the father slept in peace up high on Gargaron, subdued by sleep and sex, and held his wife enfolded in his arms.
And gentle sleep rushed down to the Greek ships to bring the message to the god of earthquakes, the god who wraps around the world, Poseidon. He stood beside him, and his words took flight. "Poseidon, you should now feel free to help the Greeks and give them glory for a while. As long as Zeus is still asleep, I have enshrouded him in soft, deep slumber. Hera tricked him to go to bed with her." With this, sleep passed among the noble tribes of humans. Poseidon was encouraged all the more to help the Greeks, and with a mighty bound, he joined the fighters at the front and asked them, "Greeks, are we giving up again? And will we let Hector win the victory? Let him take the ships and get the triumph? I am certain he thinks he will, and boasts of his success, because Achilles stays beside the ships, enraged at heart. But we will not need him, if all the rest of us protect each other and urge each other on. So come on now, everyone, do exactly as I say. Take up the best and biggest shields we have, put shining helmets on your heads, and seize the longest spears and charge, and I will lead you. And I believe that Hector, son of Priam, however eager he may be to fight, cannot withstand us. Any man whose shield is small, although his will to fight is great, should give his little shield to someone weaker and take a larger one." So spoke the god. The people heard and eagerly obeyed.
There are roughly 1 million things I want to ask you about that passage, because there's so much I love about it. One of the things I love is how it evokes that thing that the poem does so well of going from the way up in the clouds to right down on the ground, and how fast it moves.
So fast, yes.
Yeah.
It's like a cinematic cut. And also the way that it shifts so fast in tone from here's this comic scene, and yet then it becomes cosmic, and it's like the marriage of Uranus and Gaia. It's earth and heaven,
Yeah.
and it's going to generate the whole world. And then we're in the midst of this noisy battlefield scene, and there's all this different kind of action and noise and battle and multiple different people clashing together. Yes.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing that I love about it that it does so well is that, and another kind of high and low pairing, is the high and low of both the humans and the gods in this story, that they are literal gods and heroes, and they're also like kind of nincompoops and annoying sometimes, you know.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's not incompatible, right? I mean, you can be a god and also be a nincompoop. It's not, yeah.
Yeah, Well, there's hope for me yet then, I guess. The other thing is that I think it really evokes what I love about your translations, this one and the Odyssey, which is that your translations are so direct. You know, I feel like there's no barrier between me as a reader and the poem in ways that I think previous generations of translators maybe have like pushed readers away almost, and I feel like you are really bringing us in. And I wonder how you think about that, why that's important to you.
I'm glad you feel that way. I mean, I think in some ways I make some choices that could potentially seem off-putting. I mean, the fact that I use regular traditional meter, that I didn't know how that was going to land with readers. I mean, I thought maybe that's going to make everyone think this is sort of so old-fashioned and stiff because most contemporary poetry doesn't use regular meter. I mean, that was very important to me because I think it's so important in the original. I think about it partly just in terms of the pacing and the clarity of Homeric syntax are so important in the original that you can't get bored if you're reading Homer because something different is happening almost every few lines. There's a change of speaker, there's a change of tone, there's a change of setting and world. So I made a sort of deliberate effort with the Odyssey in particular to not expand on the original. So I tried to confine myself to the same number of lines as the original. I didn't do that with the Iliad because it proved impossible.
Yeah.
But I was still in that mindset of one of the things I want to translate is the pace. And I want not to sort of add in extra doodles or make it twice as long as the original. And I also want to make it not twice as difficult as the original or twice as padded. So I think those things, ideally, I hope, convey something of just how exciting Homer is.
Yeah, well, I think you succeeded. And I mean, I don't know, I think if you're gonna pick a meter, iambic pentameter is like the most familiar meter to a lot of people, if just through Shakespeare, if nothing else. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, hopefully people heard it when you read, but and if anyone's read any of the original, it does, the meter is the whole thing, the da, 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 it has the, so it didn't, I don't know, it didn't feel like a barrier at all. It felt like
good, yes,
an open door.
Yes, good. Yeah, I mean, I've heard from people who've said, I only realized in like book 3 or book 4 that it's magical, and I started reading out loud, and it's kind of nice. Because I don't want it to be that it's sort of announcing itself as, look, I'm showing off with doing something poetic, because that's not the point.
Right.
The point is, it should have a sort of naturalness to it.
And do you think that those choices reflect the original in meaningful ways? Like, do you think I know you have to guess, but was the reception of it, the experience of it more immediate and direct?
I mean, I think there's so much debate one could get into about that. I mean, I think one thing we can definitely say about the original is that it was seen by people in antiquity as entertaining and as emotionally affecting. I mean, the fact that Plato's Socrates wants to ban Homer from his semi-ideal republic because Homer stirs up so many feelings and presents people behaving so badly,
right.
but especially because it makes you feel so much. And if your ethical ideal is to be very controlled and not rolling around in the dung, furious with people and slaughtering people and lamenting, then you don't read Homer because it makes you feel too much.
Right.
And so I wanted to evoke something like the kind of text which does make you feel too much, and that also has a sort of clarity about it. I mean, but then also has this traditionality about it through the poetic form. And I think that's a difficult needle to thread. I also felt there were elements of the original that I can't convey. I can't make up an English that's a mix of different dialects in the way that the original is. Because if I were to do that, it would come across as sounding modernist or experimental,
right,
rather than sounding traditional.
Right. You talk in, I think it's in your translator's notes about like word choices that you wrestled with, speaking of which I totally loved, because you were like, I think you said at some point you thought about whether the warriors could call each other buddy.
Yes.
And like you wrestled with the word macho. Mm-hmm. So why didn't it work out with macho?
I mean, I still kind of like the word macho, and I think there is such a thing. I mean, I think it corresponds to as much as any English word does. Machismo corresponds to agenorrhea, this excessive manliness, which is a running thread, especially in the Iliad. But I felt if I were to use that word for when the Homeric heroes have their agen or thumos, their excessively manly spirit that impels them to rush to the front lines and show off, it's going to sound like I'm imposing a modern thing onto these characters, as opposed to, in the course of being immersed in this poem, you may realize that there are resonances between how you might think about masculinity and how this poem might think about masculinity, and they're not exactly the same thing, and yet they also might have a relationship. And so I felt I have to be, I mean, people in translation theory talk about, is translatorly visibility or invisibility a good thing? I felt I have to be wily about the places I'm visible and the places I'm not visible. Because if I'm too visible in places that might feel predictable, then people might not be able to see the things I want to show you.
Yeah, it seems impossible really to do either of those things ultimately, right? To be visible, totally visible or invisible.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was the Nabokov translation of Eugene Onegin, where he's like, well, we'll just like translate it exactly like it was, because then it'll be invisible, and it's like the most unreadable thing you've ever.
It's the most unreadable thing ever, and also, as he himself acknowledges, he has to have footnotes like skyscrapers, which I love that image, but also it means that the text is buried in the footnotes, and it's actually much more footnote than
it's like the size of the power broker, that thing,
And if you want to, what you want to do is evoke an immediate experience that's something like the immediate experience of the original, that's not the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about how you grapple with previous translations of these books. And I see we're also getting a lot of great audience questions, so we'll get to those in a minute as well. But, it seems like one of the things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that being a translator, you're either translating something because it's never been translated, or because you think everyone who came before you didn't do as well as you could. No? I
think retranslation, especially of a very, very, very often translated text like these Homeric poems, there's a different kind of pressure. I mean, there's definitely pressure if you're the only translator of a contemporary author from somewhere else around the world. I don't think retranslation is worth it unless you're doing something different and valuable. It doesn't necessarily have to be better. It just has to be different and also responsible. So I don't think, obviously it's more fun if I diss everyone else.
I'm not asking you to diss anyone by name, believe me.
Right. I've learned a lot from teaching a whole range of different translations of Homer and other ancient texts. I felt I could do something different that wasn't out there for people like me to use in the classroom or for general readers to use. Different doesn't have to mean better. You can think of retranslation as being like another production of a classic play, or as being like another performance of a score, right? It doesn't have to be that this is the best interpretation of this opera. It has to be a different interpretation, which also is valuable and has a particular unique creative vision, which brings out elements of the original that might not have been in last year's Hamlet. This year's Hamlet's going to be different.
All right, well, that's a fair and
I'm just being diplomatic.
No, I
could be more haterish if you want, but I'm not going to do it today.
Okay, I'm going to get to audience questions in a second. And while I look through them, I would love to hear more about your research for this, because that was, and I should say actually, because this reminds me of when we were talking about translators, your introductions in both of these books are worth the price alone. So I highly recommend everyone really read those. You gotta love a crowd that gives it up for an introduction.
I love that. And endnotes.
Very good endnotes.
People aren't going to clap for the endnotes, that's okay. Clap for the maps. That might be, they're good though.
But one of the things you said in the introduction was that your research process was kind of like the obvious things. You read the original and you read a lot of scholarly commentary and things like that. But that you were like watching YouTube videos of people sifting grain and like looking at sunsets. And so can we hear about that part of your research? Like what were you looking for? What were you doing? And how did it show up in the work itself?
So things like, the Iliad has a lot of sound, and in my daily life, I live in Philadelphia, I hear a lot of traffic. I don't hear a lot of what does an arrow sound like when it's released from a divine silver bow. I don't hear a lot of clashing bronze on bronze.
No?
But it's actually, it's relatively rare, at least in my neighborhood. But I felt in order to evoke those noises, I need to have in my mind not just here are all the sort of cartoon English words for pow, gazoo. I can't actually use any of those. I can't use boing. But I need to have in my mind or in my ears, what might an arrow sound like going through space? Or what might bronze sound like? Or what might a war trumpet sound like? And in order to come up with whatever is the vocabulary for that, I need to be able to think through how might I describe that sound? Or similarly, where I live, I listen to geese and pigeons and maybe rats, but I don't typically hear a lot of cranes flying south and those kinds of things. I mean, especially about sound and the look of things that I don't usually see. And also for the technology. I mean, both reading up on the technology of archaic weaving and the ways that the standing loom is actually different from the loom you might have in your mind if you're used to the idea of a mechanical loom of some kind or a flat loom. Yeah.
What was there a particularly weird rabbit hole that research led you down?
I mean, all of it's a bit weird. I mean, none of it is stuff that
Fair.
yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to turn to some audience questions. We have many good ones, and a couple asked the similar question in different ways, so I'm going to read this one. But how is the Iliad relevant to the 21st century, to our world?
I mean, when people ask about that, I tend to think the first thing to say is that, you need to read it because it's not relevant. We shouldn't always be sort of instantly thinking everything we read and everything we're immersed in should be all about now, because I think that's limiting. It's limiting about human potential. And I think that, I actually think that's particularly relevant now because we're in this moment of sort of huge change in human life, human experience. I mean, what life is going to be like on Earth, if there is human life on Earth in like 50 or 100 years, it's going to be totally different. And so I think there's something really valuable about being exposed to the ways that human imaginations have already been very different. Human societies have been very different. And being immersed in ancient literature gives you that sense of how you can be both deeply human and very, very different in how you set things up. And then once you've made that imaginative leap and you're immersed in this very alien world where there are these weird gods and people are sacrificing huge amounts of animals and they're using weird technology, but then you may then also realize, wow, technology really matters in this poem. That is maybe different tech, but it's the question of how are humans fused with technology is there in the Iliad, and it's also there for us. Yeah. The questions about community and violence and how do communities tear each other apart, not just by me and them, but it's also people who are supposedly on the same side who are arguing with each other in ways that are deadly. And that, of course, is the plot of the Iliad, is all about how each of the three societies in the poem are riven by conflict between members of the same society. Grief and rage have really never gone away, and they're absolutely still part of our world now. And also honor and celebrity and fixating on particular famous people and the question of whether, how are we going to be remembered when we're dead? And how do we remember those from the past? I mean, those questions have always been relevant for human society, and they're relevant in different ways now from how they were in the Iliad.
Yeah. I mean, the one that I think about a lot, and I don't really know what the right word is that isn't anachronistic, but the issues of problematic men very much in this book, And there's a lot of anachronistic ways, I think, to look at that in this book, but I think there are also some things that feel kind of eternally true, tied in largely to rage and grief and men not knowing where to put them.
Right. I mean, there are also some pretty scary goddesses, as we've seen in the two passages so far. So it's not that being totally destructive and horrible and terrifying is a uniquely masculine characteristic in this poem. It certainly isn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, the Iliad is very wide-ranging in how it explores the particularities of what does it mean to be masculine. There's not just one way to be masculine. Yeah. There's not just one way to be goddessy or to be a mortal woman.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is a speculative question, but I hope you will indulge it. Could women have had a hand in creating the Iliad or the Odyssey?
Maybe. I mean, in most societies where we know about folklore, women are very often part of, telling kids bedtime stories. And insofar as I said before, like these poems are based on centuries of oral tradition, I think there's no reason not to think women storytellers could have been part of that tradition. We have zero evidence for any ancient Greek rhapsode or poet before we get to lyric poets like Sappho, but that's a different tradition and a different meter. We don't have any evidence for bards composing in dactylic hexameter being women. Within the Homeric poems themselves, there are various bard figures, like Demodocus in the Odyssey, who's a guy. And yeah, I don't know. We can speculate, but it's completely made up. I feel like it's a potential topic for a novel rather than for a historical study.
Yeah. That was the funny thing I learned when I started studying classics. It was like I'd read all these history books assuming they were all facts. And I was like, oh, you just made all this up and then told me it was true?
Yes. Yeah.
Is the Iliad anti-war, considering all the unheroic, violent, and brutal deaths that are featured in it?
I would say the Iliad is both anti-war, but also, what does that even mean in a world before there's such a thing as being a conscientious objector? It's not a poem which imagines there could ever be a society without Eris, without conflict. Within mortal human society, there is never going to be a world without war, I think, in the poem's imagination. At the same time, the poem ends with grief and loss. The Ares, the god of war, is the most hated of all the gods. Even the other gods see Ares as disgusting and hateful. And yet he's still an immortal god, and he's always going to be with us. He's always going to rage on the battlefield, and there are always going to be... The Shield of Achilles depicts a version of the whole world, and it includes both the city at peace, in which conflict can be contained, and the city at war, in which conflict can't be contained. War is the sphere where men win glory. I think the Iliad celebrates war as well as protesting against it. It shows us how much loss and horror is generated by warfare, both obviously for people who are killed, obviously for people who are enslaved, obviously for people whose cities are sacked, but also even for those who are successfully killing other men, they're soon going to be killed themselves. Achilles is the most successful warrior, as we're going to hear in the final reading, and that means only that he's very close to death and he's soon going to die himself, and also that he is before death going to experience terrible losses and terrible griefs.
So nuanced.
Yeah.
What are some of the sensitivities you tried bringing to this translation that you felt were missing in earlier translations of the Iliad? Were you more attentive, for example, to gender, race, and other aspects of identity than previous translators have been?
So we talked about whether or not you can get me to diss other translators.
I'm just trying, I just want to spark some controversy.
Yes, I know. Gotta be mean and controversial. I've spent too much time with the Iliad to be very confident that conflict is going to end in good things. So start a big quarrel, and soon enough the brains are spattered all over the stage. So when I did my proposals for both the Iliad and the Odyssey, I would look at other translations, and of course I've taught other translations to undergraduates over the many years that I've been teaching in the classics department. But while I was actually working on both the Iliad and the Odyssey, I wasn't sort of constantly looking at other translations. I was looking at commentaries, looking at dictionaries, looking at the original, of course, but not looking closely at other translations while I was doing mine, because I felt that's just going to be counterproductive. So I'm not sure if I can really answer this question very well, because there's a lot I don't know about how does my translation differ in this or that respect. I felt that I knew for sure that I wanted to use meter. I knew, which is not what's done in most 20th and 21st century translations of Homer. I knew also that I wanted to pay a lot of attention to the fluctuations of point of view and what we talked about before, of fluctuations of setting, mood, voice, and the pacing. I think it's possible that that attentiveness to how quickly Homeric narrative changes, that results in thinking about how is this character's perspective different from that character's perspective. And ideally, I hope the result is sometimes that I'm making Homer less monolithic, like less single-voiced, which might then also mean maybe I'm drawing your attention to the fact that Helen's perspective on her relationship with Paris is not the same as Paris's perspective on it. And maybe Aphrodite's perspective on it is different again. Does that mean more attentiveness to gender or just more attentiveness to point of view in a more expansive way? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I can say about race. I mean, I thought a lot about how the Homeric poems are proto-political. I mean, proto-political in that they are composed before the polis, the Greek city-state, existed as a thing. But they're sort of meditating on how do people, meaning mortal men, relate to each other, and how do council meetings operate? What are the dividing lines between agreement and devastating cataclysmic quarrels? So thinking about power all the time, and power and structural violence as these underlying features of Homeric society, which sometimes bubble up into spear violence. I'm not sure if that is necessarily to do with modern political categories, but it may be related. I'm not sure. Right.
Well, I think that was a very fair answer. And I think, again, I'm just going to urge everyone to read the introductions, because I think some of the sensitivities that got hinted at in the questions, it feels like you think about them and grapple with them in the introduction, in interesting ways. Okay, we're going to bring up Morgan and Ben for one more reading in a second. I'm curious, after you translate Homer, do you just never translate out anything ever again? Are you done?
I mean, I hope I'm not done, because I love translating.
I hope you're not done either.
So right now I'm doing a fun project, which is Ovid's Heroines, or Heroides. It's this Latin series of verse epistles of mythical ladies writing to their terrible boyfriends, saying what a terrible boyfriend you are. And so it's fun. It's a shorter text, and it's very different in style. And it's interesting for me to just work with couplets as opposed to the narrative sort of verse paragraphs and speeches of Homer, and to work with verse epistle, and also just to figure out how do I make sure the punchlines land in the right place.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds good. And maybe can you set up a little bit for us this next reading, which is book 21. We talked about how had to get some of the poem's violence into the reading so people could know what that was like.
Yes, so the Iliad has many, many, many massacre sequences, which scholars call it an aristeia, when a particular hero has his moment of glory of slaughtering a whole bunch of people one after another on the battlefield, and through how many people he gets to kill, proving that he's Aristos. So you prove that you're the best as a warrior by how many people you can kill in quick succession. So we've had sequences of multiple different heroes in the poem demonstrating their bestness on the battlefield. Agamemnon has had his time of chopping off people's heads on the battlefield. Hector's had this whole sequence of successful battlefield experiences and also some wounds and losses. Diomedes has had his turn. We've had these multiple different sequences of battlefield killing. So by the time we get to this late stage in the poem, it may seem like there's nothing left there's no greater maximum amount of violence that you can get to. But we've been kept waiting to see what is it like when Achilles returns to battle. And of course, he's sort of been built up and built up and built up by absence, because we haven't got to see Achilles fighting. The swift-footed hero is not moving his swift feet for most of the poem. He's just sitting in his tent doing beach and moaning and singing and playing to the lyre. And then we get this climactic moment when, after Hector has reached the ships and is about to set fire to the Greek fleet and cut off the point of the possibility of going home, Achilles' dearest person, Patroclus, begs him to let him go as his second self back into battle. And of course, we know it's going to happen, and it still makes you cry every time Patroclus gets killed by Hector. That fuels a second stage in Achilles' cataclysmic wrath, where he returns to battle, not furious now at Agamemnon and his fellow Greeks, but at Hector and the Trojans, and wanting to slaughter as many as possible, and overstepping all the sort of norms that have been established by the poem up to that point. Like, ideally we don't kill suppliants. Ideally we don't kill children. Ideally we don't clog up the landscape with blood. And Achilles oversteps all of these norms and goes further and further and further towards what would it be to be the most excessive and the most infinite possible kind of war-killing machine, as close as possible to a human turning into Ares who rages blind across the battlefield.
All right. Well, Emily and I are going to exit the stage. Again, you can get your book signed over here afterward. Let's give a huge round of applause for Emily Wilson. Let's give it up for Morgan Spector and Ben Shenkman. Thank you, everyone.
Achilles, please. I beg you by your knees to pity me. Do right by me and spare me. I have already been your suppliant, deserving grace from you, my Lord, because it was with you that I first tasted bread, Demeter's grain, the day you captured me, when you had found me by the well-built orchard and took me as a slave to holy Lemnos, far from my father and my family, and sold me for 100 head of cattle. But after I had paid 3 times that price, I was set free, and it has been 12 days since I returned to Troy. I have endured terrible things, and now destructive fate has brought me to your hands again. It seems I must be hated by the father Zeus because he gave me over to you twice. I do not think I will escape your hands. Now a divinity has brought me here, but I will say one final thing to you. Consider this, I beg you. Do not kill me, because I did not share a womb with Hector, who killed your friend, who was both strong and kind.
This was the plea of Priam's noble son. The answer he received was far from gentle. Fool, do not talk to me of ransom. Hush. Before Patroclus died and met his fate, I was a little more inclined to spare the Trojans. I took many of them prisoner and sold them off alive as slaves. But now, no Trojan will escape from death. Whenever a god casts one of you into my hands in front of Troy, especially sons of Priam. So die, my friend. Why are you so upset? Patroclus has already died as well, and he was far superior to you. Do you not see how tall and fine I am? My father was a noble, handsome man. My mother was a goddess. Even so, death and strong destiny will come for me. And there will be some dawn or noon or evening when somebody will take away my life in battle with a spear's throw or an arrow.
At this, his victim's heart and body sank. He dropped the spear, knelt down, spread out his arms, and then Achilles drew his sharpened sword and struck his neck above the collarbone and drove the two-edged blade in all the way. He lay stretched out, face down upon the ground. Black blood dripped out of him and wet the earth. Achilles grabbed him by his foot and threw him into the river to be swept away, and triumphed over him with these winged words.
Lie there among the fishes who will lick blood from your wound. They will not care for you. Your mother will not lay you on a bier or offer ritual cries of grief for you. Instead, Scamander's eddying streams will bring you down to the sea's broad lap. A fish will leap beneath the darkening ripples through the waves to eat Lycaon's bright white shining fat. Die, all you Trojans, all of you must die until I reach the holy town of Troy. And you will run, but I will be behind you, slashing and slaying. You will get no help from this fair river with its silver streams, to whom you sacrifice so many bulls and horses cast alive into the currents. Despite all that, you Trojans have to die by dreadful deaths until you have repaid the slaughter of Patroclus and the ruin you brought upon the other Greeks you killed beside the swift Greek ships while I was gone.
At this, the river grew yet more enraged, wondering in his heart how best to make Achilles stop his deadly work and how to save the Trojans from destruction. Meanwhile, the son of Peleus was brandishing his long, dark-shadowed spear. Intent to kill, he leapt upon Asteropaeus, son of Pelagon, the son of Axius, the broadly flowing river with deep eddies, by noble Periboea, the eldest daughter of Acesamenus. The whirling river mingled with her, and she bore Pelagon, whose son Asteropaeus was the one on whom Achilles pounced. Asteropaeus had climbed out of the river and now stood holding 2 spears, and Xanthus gave him courage because he was so angry at the slaughter of all the young men whom Achilles killed amid his streams, to whom he showed no pity. As they drew close, swift-footed Lord Achilles asked him,
"Who are you? Where do you come from? And do you dare to challenge me in battle? When sons encounter me, their parents weep."
The glorious son of Pelagon replied, "Proud son of Peleus, why do you ask about my ancestry? Paeonia, a fertile country far away from here, is where I come from, and I brought with me Paeonian warriors with spears. It is 11 days since I arrived at Troy. I am the grandson of a flowing river, broad Axius, the most magnificent and loveliest of waters on the earth. He fathered Pelagon, the famous spearman, who was my father, so they say, and now, famous Achilles, let us fight." He made these threats, and great Achilles aimed his spear of Pelian ash. Asteropaeus threw both spears at once, as he was ambidextrous. One struck Achilles' shield but did not break it, blocked by the gold the god had forged for him. The other spear just grazed Achilles' arm. Black blood gushed out. The weapon sailed right past him and fixed itself in earth, although it longed to sate itself on flesh. Achilles, eager to kill Asteropaeus, hurled his spear of ash, which usually flew straight but missed, and hit the riverbank up high and planted to half its length. The son of Peleus drew out his sharp sword from beside his thigh and pounced in fury, while Asteropaeus struggled to pull the spear out of the bank. 3 times he tugged and twisted it. 3 times his effort failed. The 4th time, he intended to bend and snap the ashwood spear, but then, before he managed it, Achilles came near him and swung his sword and took his life. He slashed his belly underneath the navel, and all his bowels spilled out. He gasped, and darkness covered his eyes. Achilles jumped upon him, stood on his chest, and stripped his arms and armor, and spoke triumphantly.
"Lie there. It is difficult, even for a river's grandson, to grapple with the sons of mighty Zeus. You claim to be descended from a river, but I am proud to claim my ancestry from Zeus, the son of Cronus, and the man who fathered me was Peleus, the king of many Myrmidons. He was the son of Aeacus, who was the son of Zeus. Zeus is more powerful than any river that gurgles on its journey to the sea. Now, you have a big, fine river with you now. See if he does you any good. There is no way to fight with Zeus, the son of Cronos. Not even the majestic Achelous competes with him, nor even the great might of fathomless, immeasurable ocean, from whom flows every river, every sea, all springs and fountains, and all deep, dark wells. Yes, even he is frightened of great Zeus when crackling thunder rumbles from the sky."
With this, he drew his bronze spear from the bank and left the dead man lying on the sand, robbed of his precious life. Dark water lapped around the body, soaking it, and soon the fish and eels were busily at work, nibbling at the fat around his kidneys.